Hello and welcome to Journal. I'm Steve Kendall. What's going on in Columbus and the state? What's going on in Washington, D.C. as we start the new year? Joining us, the host of the State of Ohio, Karen Kasler, also Dr. Nicole Kalaf-Hughes and Dr. David Jackson from Bowling Green State University. Welcome all of you to Journal. A lot has changed since we talked the last time. There was speculation about the governor's race, who would be the lieutenant governor candidates, et cetera, and that's sort of fallen into place. So Karen, kind of bring us up to speed. Acton has selected her lieutenant governor, a running mate. Ramaswamy has, and then we've got another guy who not a lot of people know about who's entered kind of as a side candidate. But so talk about what's going on in Columbus with regard to how people are viewing Acton, Pepper, Ramaswamy, McCauley.
Yeah, we got the running mates on the same day, essentially, because Vivek Ramaswamy had planned an event in Cleveland where he told VIPs in an invitation that he would introduce his running mate, who is Senate President Rob McCauley. Not a huge surprise. A lot of people saw that as a real strong possibility for him to select McCauley. Even though the event was in Cleveland, I think a lot of people thought that if he picked McCauley, it would be in Northwest Ohio, but that's what ended up happening. And on the same evening that kind of leaked out, Dr. Amy Acton's choice of running mate leaked out as well, and that's former Ohio Democratic Party Chair David Pepper. She introduced him first on the next day, just the way that the schedules worked, at an event in Columbus that was designed to be a roundtable talking about affordability, but it was the first appearance for her and David Pepper together. Pepper, again, former Democratic Party chair for Ohio, but also has run statewide twice and lost. He's got a pretty big social media profile. And so McCauley has served in the House and Senate as well. And so you've got two outsider candidates who've never been elected to a public office in the top ticket, Ramaswamy and Acton, and then two people who are their running mates who have some experience running statewide and, in McCauley's case, actually being in the legislature. And then you mentioned the other candidate, Casey Putsch is his name. He's running to the right of Ramaswamy, so Ramaswamy will have a primary. And he has selected as his running mate a woman named Kim Georgeton, and she is from Southwest Ohio, a former Moms for Liberty chapter chair who had an anti-mask and anti-vaccine organization. So he's definitely running further to the right than Ramaswamy, trying to pick up votes from people who want to abolish property taxes and some other issues.
Yeah, and Nicole, would you view that? Is there a reason why, and I think Karen touched on that, was that the purpose to find a kind of a complementary person to these two outsiders, and then the third person who is an extreme outsider?
Yeah, so both of our kind of major party, endorsed gubernatorial candidates in Ramaswamy and Acton are not what I would consider traditional gubernatorial candidates. They don't have a long political history in statewide elected office. They haven't served in really any elected office previously, and that's pretty unusual for the office of governor. Additionally, they are not white men, which the majority of our gubernatorial candidates and our elected officials nationwide are white men. And so they've both kind of heard some pushback from kind of the extremes on that. And so picking kind of more traditional experienced running mates is definitely what I would expect. As far as the additional candidate on the Republican side, that I think also makes a lot of sense. Ramaswamy has actually taken some heat for both race and religion. And not being in line with what some feel Ohioans want for the Republican Party. And so seeing a further to the right challenger enter, I kind of expected that to happen. I think it was really unusual for Ramaswamy to get the endorsement so early from kind of the federal administration. And so I think having a candidate running to the right of him is probably something that was likely to happen given what we know about politics.
Yeah, and the other thing is too, I guess, David, with Mr. McCauley, he's rooted in Ohio, Northwest Ohio, Napoleon, Ohio. There was some thought possibly that there was a reason why he may or may not have gone for lieutenant governorship, but I heard someone from the Republican Party talk about the fact that they believe there's a lot of ground to gain in Northwest Ohio. In essence, Spurs said, we're writing off the 3 Cs. We're not going to worry about those. We think he's the right choice because he'll bring more votes from Northwest Ohio. That could be the difference in a close race. And that's their version of it. What do you think about why McCauley is there?
Well, up here in occupied Michigan, or what we call Northwest Ohio, there is a sense of always being sort of, left out and not considered. And there was even, tiny bit of groundswell, if you could even barely call it that, suggesting that Toledo Mayor Kapsakevich should be Acton's running mate. The Blade, Toledo Blade newspaper, can always be counted on to find a Northwest Ohio angle and try to push the Northwest Ohio angle on things, but that didn't happen, obviously. It also has a Northwest Ohio implication in that the 9th district, currently held by Representative Marcy Kaptur, was redrawn to include much of Senator McCauley's state Senate district. And there was speculation that he would jump in the primary there with Representative Williams and former Representative Marin on the Republican primary side, because the district is favors Republicans, and so there was some thought that that might happen, but that didn't happen, and I'm sure that that's probably good news from the Williams and Marin side of things to make it through that primary.
Yeah, because I was going to add. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Karen.
Can I add one thing really quick?
Sure.
I think for a lot of people, the idea of a lieutenant governor candidate bringing in votes is potentially a little bit less of a reason why they pick some people as running mates, because people tend to vote for the person at the top of the ticket rather than the running mate. But certainly, if a running mate hurts you, that could be a problem. And I think that's potentially one reason why these candidates were selected, is that they do have that political experience, so they're unlikely to damage or do anything that's going to hurt the campaign of Ramaswamy and Acton.
Yeah, I mean, people don't vote because of the vice presidential candidate. They certainly, therefore, do not vote because of the lieutenant governor candidate. The lieutenant governor candidate, as Karen pointed out, has to sort of pass the laugh test. Are they a serious candidate? And I suppose in a more realistic sense, people might say, can this person conceivably be governor? If yes, then they don't think about him again, probably. So.
And not to go back and revisit history, but I guess if you looked back at John McCain, did his choice for vice president impact him negatively or positively? That's a question that's been written about a lot, but that could be a case where we say that could have been a problem. That could have been a drag rather than a benefit. So, as I think as one of you said, that as long as you don't damage the campaign, that's your job, sort of. So, yeah.
And then on this other Republican candidate, one thing, I mean, the probability is low that he's going to, win the nomination when the entire state, party machinery is pushing in the other direction. But what percentage ends up getting could be an interesting signal if Ramaswamy is in trouble with the base or not. If he's getting into double figures or more, that could be a sign of trouble.
Okay. When we come back, I have one question I want to ask about that after the primary, which you touched on a little bit. Back in just a moment with Karen Kasler, Nicole Kalaf-Hughes, and David Jackson here on The Journal. Back in a moment. Thanks for staying with us on The Journal. Our guests are Karen Kasler, the host of the State of Ohio, Dr. Nicole Kalaf-Hughes, Dr. David Jackson from Political Science Department, Bowling Green State University. Karen, real quick, we're talking about this other candidate, Casey Push. He's going to run in the Republican primary. Clarify something for us. If he finishes second or whatever, could he then turn around and run as an independent, or does Ohio law prevent him from doing that? If he doesn't make the Republican nomination, can he turn around and say, I'm going to run as an independent? Can he do that or not?
Well, we've seen that actually happen in terms of a candidate having a contested primary. Mike DeWine, who won in 2022 by a pretty large margin, had two opponents in the primary. And neither of them, of course, ran, because candidates for the general election need to file by February 4th. So no, he could not run as a candidate for the Libertarian Party or anything like that. What he could do is he could run as, and any candidate could, as a write-in candidate. And they have to be officially write-in, or else the vote for them doesn't count. He'd have until August 24th to file that paperwork. So it's possible, but he wouldn't be a candidate. We have a sore loser law, essentially, in Ohio. You can't run for an election and then if you lose, say, well, I'm going to run again, but I'm a different party.
Okay. So, and the odds on him being successful as a write-in are pretty limited. Should that be the attempt? Pretty
low, particularly because he's coming from so far outside politics broadly. When we've seen write-in candidates be successful, usually they're incumbents. It's not someone who is coming from so far outside of the political like the typical political spectrum to jump in.
Yeah, and write-ins traditionally, David, I'm sure have not been successful probably in many places around the country because you're starting from below ground zero almost in a way.
Yeah, there's a low chance of that succeeding. Although, I mean, it is an interesting situation with this candidacy because I've been following social media posts from the state Republican Party promoting Ramaswamy. And it's not been, a systematic or rigorous analysis, but it's interesting what's happening in the comment section. There's a lot of opposition in the Republican base to Ramaswamy. And that's always been there when the posts are made. Now, when the posts are made because of the other candidate, the comments are both negative about Ramaswamy and putting links and connections, trying to tout that candidate. And then the third thing that's been popping up a lot as well is whatever candidate says they'll ban property taxes is somebody that I can get behind. And so it's an interesting stew of opposition to the chosen candidate, now a connection with an option against the chosen candidate and a specific issue that they want
to draw the line.
Right.
Yeah.
So.
And Karen, well, I guess we can talk about that. There's been a lot of activity. You've had David Thomas on your show numerous times to talk about the things they put in place to start to provide some property tax relief. Most of it doesn't happen until 27, when it'll start to show up theoretically on people's property tax payments. But property tax abolition, there's a movement out there. There's a citizens initiative. What's the undercurrent in Columbus about that? Is the legislature, General Assembly, working to figure out a way to head that off by trying to do some of the things that Dave Thomas put out there? Or is that still, they're not done working on it yet, I guess is what I'm asking.
Yeah, there are more than 50 bills that are out there that specifically reference property taxes. And some of them are bills we've seen before, like the homestead tax exemption expansion, and also the circuit breaker that would trigger a property tax cut at a certain level of income. Those have bipartisan support, and those have not moved, but those are two that are sitting out there. The abolishment group, they're active on social media, but I always try to remember that social media is not reality. And the group that's out there that is very clearly abolishment, that's all that they will accept, I think is a fraction of the overall population. There is significant frustration with property taxes, no question, but you're already starting to see some folks talk about the need for property taxes to fund schools and law enforcement and all the things that property taxes pay for. And if you just get rid of that, then the chaos that would result is pretty significant. And so the Republican leadership in the State House has been talking about that part of it, saying that we're doing these things, and if you abolish, it will be something that we won't be able to handle. So I think we're going to see more of that going forward.
Yeah, and real quick, has anybody brought forward a plan down there as an alternative to property taxes? Because that's the question people ask, is like, well, okay, if I don't have this funding, where's it going to come from? But probably the General Assembly doesn't want to open that door, because then people say, well, there is an alternative then. So,
well, but there has been a couple
okay.
A state sales tax, expansion of the state sales tax, a statewide 20 mil property tax. But, these are ideas that are in that 20 bill or that 50 bill mix of property tax reform ideas that I don't know that they're going to get a whole lot of traction, because that would be wholesale changes to what Ohio does right now.
Yeah. Well, and the estimates where from Ohio's economic data, if you were to get rid of property taxes, not only are townships entirely funded by property tax, and there's no alternative plan for where they would get their money from, but the estimates are that you would need about a 20% sales tax to make up from losing property tax. Yeah. So it's the people who are looking to abolish property tax have not actually answered those questions of how people would afford a 20% sales tax, and what the thousands and thousands and thousands of Ohioans who live in townships and the townships that rely on those property taxes, what replaces those funds? Yeah. And there just really isn't an answer to that, because the group doesn't really seem to have one yet.
Yeah, and I think too, and as you read social media, because once you start to read those, and oh look, there's 1,000 comments, and some will say, well, we don't want you to no increase in the sales tax, no increase in any taxes, do away with all of them. And then I had to laugh once because someone said, well, where's the money come from? Says, you can just get that from grants. Well, I'm pretty sure grants come from taxes. Pretty sure.
Well,
so, but it shows you the array of like what's out there on the whole tax thing. No taxes at all, and yet I want everything paid for that I still have. So
the one thing I would say is, if this effort is successful, which they need over 400,000 signatures, and they're all volunteers, so that's a big hill to climb. If indeed they do make the ballot, you're going to see a real wholesale education campaign on how government works. Because one of the things I found out in looking at some of these comments on social media is a lot of people don't really understand how government works, and specifically state government.
Yeah, and I think that's true. I mean, and I guess, and that's probably not unusual because people go about their daily lives. They don't worry about how the snowplow gets paid for or why the fire department shows up when there's a fire. They just know that it's supposed to happen.
Well, and the other thing that people forget is that you can get rid of property taxes, and you can then in turn get rid of your fire departments and your police force and all that, and go to volunteer fire service and rely on county sheriffs. But the problem is that your insurance company will know all of that, and your homeowner's insurance will skyrocket. So what you're not paying in property taxes, you will be paying in insurance, because your insurance company is not going to look at the facts and be like, it'll probably be fine. They'll know that any small fire you have will be a total loss. Right. And they will charge you accordingly.
I mean, the other thing is these property tax rates are voted on by the public. So an option would be to
say no.
Say no.
yeah, and that's started to happen to some degree.
Sure.
But that's been the check and balance. That was the local level control. Was that? But apparently, some people don't think that's working the way it should. And you see things too. And I know we've got to run here, get out of this segment real quick. But some people have said only property owners should vote on property taxes, which that's a whole nother thing that deals with how the country looked at who could vote to begin with. So
renters pay property tax.
Yes, they do. It gets built into there. Yeah. So we'll be back in just a moment with Karen Kasler, Nicole Kalaf-Hughes, and David Jackson here on The Journal. Thank you for staying with us on The Journal. Our guests are Karen Kasler, Nicole Kalaf-Hughes, and David Jackson. We were talking about this last year, long before it became a thing, but now the 26 midterms are actually the year 2026. Karen, in Columbus, obviously you've got people jockeying for different things down there. How is that being viewed, the overall look in Ohio now? We do have congressional districts in place. Is that sort of now quieted down in Columbus with regard to what's going to happen in the 26 midterms, or is there still a lot of activity down there talking about that?
Well, I think there's activity in the sense that February 4th is the filing date, which we talked about earlier. Lawmakers aren't here right now. They're on a little bit of a break. I think they're supposed to come back. One chamber is going to come back at the end of January. And so there aren't a lot of people around.
Okay.
But, and I think that's, in a sense, they did accomplish a lot of stuff before the holiday break. And also there's the getting prepared to run, because you've got the entire Ohio House, half the Ohio Senate, all 15 members of Congress are running. You've got 2 Supreme Court seats. You've got, obviously, we've talked about the governor's race, but also that U.S. Senate race, which is going to be pretty high profile. It is unusual for an appointed senator who has not run for that seat to go up against a former senator who wants to come back.
Yeah, that's a good point, because Sherrod Brown, obviously well entrenched in Ohio and came very close to winning even for his re-election term. So how does that play out now? As Karen said, we've got someone who has never been elected, but now is running against someone who previously held that seat.
I think we're going to be back to a very public campaign. And I think there's going to be a lot of nationwide attention on Ohio. What's interesting is that when we've had these gubernatorial nominations of people to kind of serve in a Senate seat when someone leaves for another reasons, they actually haven't won in Ohio recent history. They have not won the re-election when they've run. I don't know that that's going to be the case again necessarily, but it's not a lock, I think. Like, you don't have that historic lock.
Well, as we talked about before, I mean, in some measures, except for the ultimate measure, which is winning the election, Sherrod Brown's electoral performance
Was above the...
In 2024 was actually pretty impressive, given that he had 11-point plus Trump headwinds and only lost by 3. And you know, you wonder if, you know, the Harris campaign had spent a little money in Ohio just to not try to win it, but to tamp down the number, if that could have helped. So now Brown is obviously thinking, without Trump on the ballot, how does that impact, you know, who actually turns out? He's running against an opponent who is not a household beloved name in Ohio. Right. Actually, you know, survey evidence shows that Sherrod has higher name recognition than John Husted does. Yeah. Yeah. And so there's going to be a huge amount of money. I think 2024 was one of the most, if not the most,
I think it was the most expensive
Senate race ever. And you know, Ohio may not be a swing state presidentially right now, but control of the Senate probably goes through Ohio again.
Yeah, and now Husted, although obviously had a track record in the state at the state level, now has a track record as a U.S. senator, which can or may not be used against him or for him. He's going to tout the things that he did. Obviously, Brown's going to say, yeah, but look at what you didn't do or what you should have done. He now has a record as a senator, which he didn't have before.
Yeah, I mean, the political climate overall is interesting right now, and I'm thinking about trying to think of a way to write about this as a political scientist. The public is just upset and angry all the time, it seems, and in an anti-incumbent mood and not happy with the way things are going. In Ohio, the Republican Party has been dominant and in charge for a long time and are running a campaign that occasionally talks about how things need to be done to improve Ohio, that Ohio needs to be changing its direction, and it's got to be a really tough situation to frame a campaign when you've been in charge for decades and the people aren't happy with what's going on. So you need to try to present yourself as the entrenched, you are the entrenched incumbents, and you're trying to present yourself as the agents of change. And that's not an enviable position for campaign strategists to be in.
Yeah, and I know, and again, we're talking about the unreal world of social media. When I look at comments, when people talk about the current people running Ohio, they don't view them as, they see them as not really being Republicans, some people. They go, well, they're not really Republicans, they're rhinos, that's why they have to go. So on one hand, they're sort of they're able to walk away from it because the people that don't like them are saying, you're not really a Republican anyhow. So don't blame the Republican Party for what the Republicans have done to Ohio. It's kind of an interesting, because those weren't real Republicans.
Well, I mean,
which is a personal, it's an opinion, it's a reaction to that, but yeah.
It's a cliche, but I mean, elections are choices, and they're not choices between an ideal and an ideal. They're a choice between two real candidates who have a chance of winning. Yeah. And so, those who say the current Republicans are only rhinos will have to make a choice. Do they hold their nose and vote for them, or do they vote, third party, or do they stay home? And the same thing on the other side. That dissatisfaction that voters have has to get resolved when the choice is between two, by their perception, flawed candidates.
Yeah, yeah. And Karen, with the General Assembly, is there a feeling there's going to be people leaving the General Assembly to do either to run for some other office or just leave because of the political climate, or is there any feel for that down there right now?
I haven't seen any wholesale departures. I mean, obviously in Congress we've seen some, but I would also argue that it's not just a choice, it's a binary choice in many ways when it comes to elections, because one person's going to win, and you have people who try to vote third party, especially in general elections, to try to send a message or that sort of thing. You're really choosing between the two most likely candidates, and either you choose one or you kind of aren't voting. You're not really doing anything to support one or the other candidate.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess if you look at Ohio, because obviously it is interesting, because the state is, as you said, David, has been controlled. I've heard numbers like, except for 4 years out of the last 30, the Republicans have controlled most of the machinery of state government, and yet there is that unrest. There's that concern that they haven't been done enough, and yet the alternative is to look at the other party, which apparently people have not been inclined to vote for the last 30 years. So somebody said it leaves you with an interesting choice, but yet they're not happy with their current people and not happy with the opposition. So could be really entertaining as it comes down to this. And I guess we'll see some of that play out in the primaries because a lot of people are going to get primaried, it appears. So, is there any, Karen? Is there anything down there just that you could say, hey, here's the next big issue that's going to pop in 2026 besides the election rigmarole? Is there something they're really focusing on, or is it they're too busy worried about getting reelected?
I think property taxes is going to be it. I mean, as those start to hit in late January and early February, you're going to start hearing people complain again about property taxes. And again, the whole idea of abolishment is extreme, but it's out there, it's being discussed, and lawmakers are going to have to push back on that and defend themselves while still saying, hey, yeah, we feel for you with how much you're paying in property taxes. So I think that's going to be continuing in from 2025, the big issue. Yeah.
And as you said earlier, I think, David, or one of you, that could be the tipping point on whether somebody votes for Casey Push or they vote for Vivek Ramaswamy, because Push is very much, I believe, citing on we need to do a lot to get rid of taxes, do whatever we can. And some people are saying that's my tip, that's my single issue. I'm a single issue voter. A couple of years ago it was abortion, it was this, whatever. Now it's property taxes. So that may be the big word for the pair of words for 2026.
It's really easy to make promises like that during a campaign and a lot harder to actually deliver on it. And this is one of the reasons that voters broadly are so dissatisfied, because to get elected in the US, you have to make so many promises about what you're going to do, what you're going to change. But the actual way government works isn't usually that fast, and you usually can't work alone. And so if you've made all these large promises about taxes or something else, and you don't immediately make the changes, voters tend to look elsewhere, or it's very easy for your potential opposition to encourage them to look elsewhere.
Okay. Well, we'll leave it there, and we'll see when we talk the next time what's transpired between now and then. So obviously there'll be a lot of activity. The General Assembly will be back, and let the fun begin, I guess. You can check us out at WBGU.org. You can watch us every Thursday night at 8 p.m. on WBGU PBS. We'll see you again next time. Good night and good luck.